Okay, here we go. So I want to welcome you guys all again to the November book club meeting. And our guest tonight is author Tania James. Tania, say hello. You can take yourself off mute if you'd like, and like to introduce you. And I want to thank you for writing this really interesting book that was gifted to me when I was, let's see, back in May. I had broken my leg and was had surgery, and so I was laid up for quite some time. And so someone brought this over, and I said, "Oh, I'll give it a shout." And I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot about something I didn't know much about before. I didn't know really anything about the India, it was going on in India in this time period, and about the British wars, and you having your same sort of situation that we had here in the United States, except that the outcome was a little different, I think, on your side. And so I found it fascinating, and I'd like to just sort of start by first welcoming you to our group and sort of asking you to give us a little background on yourself and what inspired you to write this story.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you all. I'm glad to hear that the book didn't add to the pain of recovery and maybe was a distraction. But thank you all so much for having me. This is probably the biggest book club I've zoomed into. It's sort of intimidating to see this huge hive of little faces everywhere. But I'm very honored, and November is my birthday month, so this is a very special gift.
Well, happy birthday. Hopefully was it recently, or because today's the last day?
It was the 14th, not today. But yeah. So this book is my fourth book. It's the first book of historical fiction I've written. This is a group that reads exclusively historical fiction, right?
We do. That's what I try. That's what I write.
Okay.
And so I try to stick with my genre so that I can, learn what other people are doing, and also help, develop our audience a bit. And we try to stay current release so that, it's helpful to you guys. And then, sort of, otherwise it's too big of a world to choose from. I like to look at the new stuff that's coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel sort of, are other people historical fiction writers? If you
Eileen is, Eileen, where are you? There she is. Eileen, wave your hand. Okay. Eileen, give us a little background on what you write, real quick.
Actually, my writing jumps around an awful lot. Like one book was in 1940, one book was in 1926, and one book was in 1955. And they jump in locations as well, from Canada to New York to Montana.
Okay.
And I stay all 19th century.
Okay.
From 1805 or 18 whatever to 19. The third book of that, no, the fourth book I'm working on now is 1898. So.
Oh wow! I mean, I find historical fiction. I love reading historical fiction. I love people like Jim Shepard, who writes historical fiction short stories. I don't know if anybody's read his work. Or I loved the Wolf Hall trilogy. I love Andrea Barrett. There's so many historical fiction writers I love. But I never thought of myself as someone who writes historical fiction. I just thought that is a realm for people who are really love research and are good at research and fall in love with the time period in which they're writing. And I'm not that person. I feel that I know other historical fiction writers, they often say, I don't know if you feel this way, Sharon or Eileen, that they almost feel like sometimes the research is so deductive that it's hard to stop the research and start writing. Whereas for me, it's sort of the opposite. I'm kind of like trying to get through the research so I can write the story. But if to go further back, I think I never set out to write historical fiction, but it was the automaton itself that I found so captivating when I came across it, Tipu's Tiger. And I think one of the things that I loved about it was that I'd never seen anything made by a colonized subject. I mean, they weren't colonized at that time, but from a sort of Indian perspective, a sort of Indian view on imperial power. And that was also funny. I found it funny. I found it sinister and dark and strange, but also had a kind of sense of humor to me. Maybe because if you look at it, the soldier looks like a totally comical version of a face. And so I just thought this thing is obsessing me. And at first I thought maybe I could write a contemporary story where it's in a museum and people are trying, you know, I don't know if anybody's read Possession by A.S. Byatt. I love that novel. But, you know, something that's like set in the present that's looking at a historical object. But that never was quite the question that kept nagging at me is like, who does this object matter to the most? And I kept coming back to the maker and how that making that thing could have changed that person's life. And so I was like, okay, I will look up and find all the information I need in the same way that other historical fiction writers just go to books and things to find the sort of scaffolding for their stories. And I quickly found that I couldn't find anything, because part of the problem with many books that are about a society that's been erased is that historical records don't exist, and so or have been wiped out. And so I encountered this other problem, which is that how do I write about things that existed, but we don't really have reference. We don't really have reference points for them. We don't really know who made it. All I could find out was that it was probably created by a French clockmaker and a local artisan. And I just sort of took those two things and sort of created these two people. And the sort of story sort of grew from there. And I would sort of research as I went along. So then that kind of created the structure of the story. The journey of the automaton created the structure of the story, really.
Okay, because I mean, one of the things that I found interesting now, you know, I am not a historian by any means, you know, but you tend to when you're doing, you know, historical fiction. And by the way, Diane is here. She also writes historical fiction. But you find that you have become an expert in a particular area, you know, like you said, a time period, like in the 19th century, or, you know, in World War II or whatever it might be. But I've not read anything about India in this time. And so, and I have a lot of friends who are Indian and, you know, just, you know, been to India and just never really thought about it beyond, you know, just when you go to Taj Mahal and you do all those touristy kind of things. So for me, the context, you sort of threw us into this period and the context was hard for me to get, but then I did get it. I mean, I did find myself doing more Google searches than I probably should have to try to get a sense of where I was. But, you know, you got a sense of life there at that time. And so I guess my question, if I'm getting to a question, is how did you sort of, what was your process for coming up with, you know, that, I mean, you knew the automaton was from that time period, and then the war, and then of course, you know, Tipu's overthrowing, I guess, you know, he ended his sort of reign on that area. How did you come up with that sort of the process for gathering the history around that and insertion of that? Because I found that both, I think sometimes I thought I needed more context, and I was going to ask you if the editors made you cut that context, you know, that background story in order to give us a sense of the historical setting. But then again, I thought maybe it was deliberate on your end. So I wanted to kind of get a sense of how you sort of, you know, boxed that.
Yeah, I didn't actually, they didn't actually ask me to cut anything from the context. What I have there, I think part of it, there's always a challenge when you're presenting history that is, I mean, even to me, was largely unknown. And many Indian people I know, they don't, Indian or Indian American, diaspora Indian people that don't know what Tipu's tiger is, which or who Tipu Sultan was, who was one of the most, you know, sort of the largest rival to the East India Empire at that time. So it is a challenge how much to present. I personally, I love, again, Wolf Hall, there's so much context, there's so much detail. But one thing that was really important to me was creating a sense of urgency and momentum. And I was constantly trying to think about, like, I want this to move. Like, I want this to feel like the story is kind of picking up pace, and not that it should have the same pace throughout, but that at nowhere in the novel are you sort of, starting to feel kind of weighed down. And so if I think where I was making decisions about context, I was probably favoring less than more, because I didn't want to create a situation where the reader is starting to feel like they're being taught more than they're being entertained, if that makes
Right.
sense.
That's always a tough call, right? You know, you get that, oh, you've got too much detail and you're just slowing down the pacing, or you get, oh, there's not enough detail. I don't have a sense of, of time and or place.
Right.
So it's a tough walk to balance, rope to walk. It really is, because I mean, I've been there, right? I still get it. Oh, there's not enough, history on the Civil War. And then I go, well, wait a minute, if I get too much in, then the people are just, bored. So I understand that. I was just curious because, I don't know about anybody else. We're going to ask you guys in a second. I just don't know a lot about that. So my curiosity, of course, was, heightened, and I wanted to know more. And so I found myself, me and Google are best friends some days, and some days we're not,
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was influenced a little bit too by a film called The Favorite, which was directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, and it told the story of, I think it was Queen Anne, I want to say, and her lover, who was also kind of, I just have other people seeing this movie, and I think what I loved about it was how modern it felt. It just felt it felt very much of its moment. Like it felt both historical and modern. And I wanted also that feel, like that in some ways you're in another time, but you're also, it doesn't feel that distant in some ways. And maybe that I'm thinking that might have been part of what
it's interesting. Michelle just put up a chat, guys, if you guys didn't see it. She says, I'm going to speak for you, Michelle, that she was fascinated when she read Lute and had actually heard about the Amatan before, when reading a historical novel called The Sharp's Tiger by Bernard Cornwell. I don't know if you'd heard. Interesting. She's laughing.
Yeah, I came across that novel too. I can't remember. I mean, I read so many that I feel like that's the only time. Although I think I saw it mentioned no, I don't know if it was mentioned in The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. It just maybe is a similar vibe. But yeah, I think that's the only other time I'd seen it mentioned in fiction.
Well, I have tons of other comments and questions, and we have a poll tonight. You guys know how I love my polls. I did do one tonight. But I'm going to open up a little bit. I know Miriam's got a question. I'm sure that Beth's got a question, and Janet's got a question, and Jean's got a question. And all my favorite people who like to comment. But yes, Carol, you're first. You're on, lady.
I'm sorry. I was a couple of seconds late.
No worries. Not that late.
I don't know if this question was answered yet, but I have one comment and one question. The comment is, being a social studies professor, I always love to explore other lands as well, and have a map on my lap if I have to look things up. Like I once read the book, The Piano Tuner, which takes place in Myanmar, former Burma. And I remember having my atlas on my lap, trying to find the river that the piano went down. And I did the same with this wonderful book. And isn't this an area of India that we don't really study that much? In the Southwest, correct? And this city of Mysore really is a great travel destination right now. And so I felt like, yes, it was more because of India, like other countries, but India especially, the ancient history is so relevant and timely and present, because the monuments are still so much a part of the culture as the palace is there. And so I learned a lot from looking up in an atlas and looking up, Googling travel guides, as to really, and also looking at the actual artifact. Did you ever see it?
Yeah, I did see it, Carol. I love that you use a map when you're reading. That's such a good idea. A different way of kind of locating yourself in place. But I did see it. I actually wrote the book mainly during the pandemic, so I couldn't go for a long time. because we couldn't travel. And then I did see it after I wrote the book. And I had it on a postcard above my desk throughout the years I was writing it. And so it was always this big. And then when I saw it in person, I was like, really, it was so enormous.
It's very frightening.
Yeah, yeah, it was much more humbling. I almost think it's good that I didn't see it until after I finished the novel, because it's sort of an intimidating thing to be writing about actual people, but they're not the actual people, and the object itself is its own personality, and so it was
Yeah.
able to project my own things onto it, you know.
But my real question
Yeah.
is why the title Loot?
Okay, yeah,
Target.
loot. That's a great question. Loot. I came across this word in my research early on, which is that loot actually comes from Sanskrit. It comes from Sanskrit, and it's still in Hindi. Lutna means to plunder, and so it entered the English language around this time, around the turn of the 18th century. And I really loved that. The book is talking about the movement of people, the movement of objects, the movement of wealth. And I just love that there's this word that kind of encapsulates that movement. And I also liked tonally, I was talking about how I wanted to give the novel a sort of modern feel. It felt to me like Loot has a sort of modern kind of boldness to it, and I just liked the feel of it. This hasn't happened to me with other books, but I found this title almost like before I even started writing, and it was just this very useful kind of talisman that immediately when I thought of that, every time I opened that file, that word would give me a feeling, like it would give me something to work with, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Carol. Eileen?
Yeah, I had a question about why, because most novels are written in past tense, and I had a question about why you decided to write this in present tense.
I think I wanted a sort of immediacy so that again, this has something to do with a kind of more modern and feel. And I also just felt like, you know, the challenge with historical fiction to some extent is that everything has already happened. So you kind of can, in some way, as the author, I know where things are going. But I don't want to feel like in the process of writing that I know where things are going. And I want to feel as though there's a certain level of spontaneity as to what is going on. And so on the one hand, knowing history is helpful because it gives you these tent poles to work towards or work around. But on the other hand, it can feel a little bit like, for me, it can feel a little bit, I don't know if deadening is the word, but it can feel a little bit like, well, where can I be playful, and where can I kind of infuse some spontaneity. So I think that's probably where the present tense comes from. I say I think because to some extent I feel like it's sort of also just acoustic, like what feels right. It just felt right to me, and I'm sure I always like try multiple tenses, multiple points of view until I land on the one that feels right and also sustainable.
Are your other books also in present tense?
That's a good question, because I can't remember. The one I'm writing now, the one I'm writing now is in, I think the last book I wrote was both past and present because it was jumping around in time. And I needed a way to kind of make clear what's the past and what's the present. And the one I'm writing now is in past tense, but that may change.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. Miriam?
Hello. Thank you very much for coming and for writing this interesting book. I was going to say that I found the information about the automatons and building the clockwork pieces to be really interesting. I guess that was the piece that I was most engaged with, was the craftsmanship that was going on in Mysore in the workshops of both the clockmaker and in the shop. So I'm wondering if you actually went to visit. Did you actually go and see people who were doing woodworking or clockmakers to get an idea about how some of these clocks work? And my second question is, the clock that has the elephant and the monkey and whatever the other things are on top of it, does that still exist?
So the Elephant Clock by Al Jazari doesn't exist, but the sort of book of knowledge, I can't remember, the Book of Ingenious, I can't remember the title, but the book that's in my book does exist. I don't know if it's the original, but it's all his kind of plans. And so different people have recreated the elephant clock. I think
The book of knowledge.
yeah, the Book of Knowledge. I think somebody in Saudi Arabia recreated it. So because his things are so detailed. And there's even like if you Google, there's a little video. I want to say it's like National Geographic or Al Jazeera. They did a video where they showed exactly how it worked, and that's how I figured out how it worked. Though I still don't completely understand how it works because there's an element that just goes whoop over my head. But I again, like I was writing during the pandemic, and I thought I'd started before the pandemic, and I had thought I'm gonna go to Mysore, I'm going to find out all these things, meet all these people, and it just was not possible. And so I was just YouTube was my best friend, and I just was like watching video after video after video. And then I was reading memoirs by woodworkers. I bought all these books about how to whittle this and that, and I did get in touch with the curator at the V&A Museum where Tipu's tiger is, and she sent me this one article where some guy in the 50s took apart Tipu's tiger and figured out how it worked. I must have shown that to I showed it to the smartest people I knew, and no one could, even an automaton maker who I found in the UK, and no one could completely tell me for sure how everything exactly works. They sort of could speculate on certain aspects of it. And I just I think at some point I figured out that the reader doesn't really need to know, or doesn't even really want to know how the thing works, that they just want to be convinced of how the artist feels about their work. Like what frustrates them about their work? What do they love about their work? Like Sharon and I, we're both writers, we've both written historical fiction, but if you were to ask us, what do you love about the work and what do you hate about it and what frustrates you, what confuses you, we would have different answers. And so that, I think I at some point I kind of figured that I can sort of try to pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but really it's about knowing what the character feels about the thing that they're doing.
We know what frustrates us. It's called editors. Right, Eileen? Right, Diane? Right? I mean, it's the editors. They're the ones that frustrate you.
Yes,
They,
yeah.
you're happy, glad. No, back to glad. Happy, no. They do.
Thank you. Well, I think you definitely do that. I know with Abbas, you definitely managed to do that, to get into his head. So thank you very much.
Speaking of us, thank you, Miriam, because you led me into my little poll. So I'm going to ask you guys about characters, and I should have added. I didn't add him on here, but I know the answer would have been nobody liked him. But I do have a poll on who your favorite character is, or at least the person you could. When I say favorite, it's not necessarily favorite. It's who you related to most, or whose pain you felt more than anyone else's. And where you sort of came in. So I'm going to try to launch it. I am horrible at this technology thing. You guys would never have known. I went to engineering school with you. Let's see here. Because that was back in the 80s, when we had punch cards, not when we actually did stuff. Hold on, polls. There we go. All right, loot. All right, I'm gonna launch. Hopefully you guys all see it. Okay, so when I say favorite character, please take your time and answer the character. Can everybody see it? No one can. If you can't see the poll, let me know. But who you kind of related to most, and whether it's Abbas or Yaharan, Lucian or Rum, of those folks, did you have any sort of, I probably should put lady in there, the lady Aggie. I did not include her, and I wish I had, now that I look back at this. If anybody had Aggie, you can certainly pipe in. And I know some of you guys may not have finished the book, and that's okay, because you may not have gotten to Rum, but that's okay. Just give me a sort of a shout in terms of where you felt, and then I'm going to ask you why. Tanya, are you used to seeing these polls on Zoom?
No, that's so cool. I
Yeah.
love that. I want to do
Oh.
that with students.
One of these times I'm gonna have to figure out how to do it one question at a time. You guys don't want to do 2 questions at a time, that it screws up. So I'm getting better. All right, we got 24 out of 32. I'm gonna give you guys another few minutes, a few seconds. I have to run. Thank you, Janine. We'll see you next time. Everybody made a decision? The stink bug just takes flight in front of me. Okay. I'm going to end the poll. Not everybody played. That's okay. All right. And I'm going to share the results. Surprise, surprise. So you'll see that 16% of you guys liked, I'm sorry, 67%, most of you guys were, Abbas. Obviously that was your protagonist. But I have some questions about him when we get to him. Jahan, is that how you pronounce her name? Yeah.
John or
What?
Jahan? Jean or Jahan?
Jahan. Lucien, or Lucien, however you pronounce it in French, and Rum, who I thought was interesting. So with that, I will stop sharing. I'm surprised that there was more empathy for Rum than there was for Lucien. I thought that was interesting. Okay, so is it gone now? Can you guys see me? Okay, great. So let's talk about Abbas. I mean, obviously he's your protagonist, and I was trying to, and a lot of you guys really felt for him, and I'm going to ask some input on that in just a second. But I felt it was interesting that, you were in his head for a while, but then you left his head for a while, and you jumped to this sailor, Thomas, whatever his last name was. And I was horrible with the names in this because they're Indian names. I'm going to bastardize them. I'm going to butcher them when I'm talking. So if I pronounce folks' names wrong, it's just because I can barely speak English sometimes. So there's that. But you jumped into this sailor's head, and then we lost Abbas for a while. And so I kind of lost his thread. And by the end of the book, I had trouble figuring out who he was. Somewhere along the line, I lost him. And then I was also wondering if that was because, his arc was one of, he was clinging to this past, clinging to this thing, just like Tipu cling to his kingdom. That was his thing. He clung to it, and he was going to die living in the past of what his father expected of him and what he expected of himself. And likewise, Abbas was doing the same thing, right? He's living in the past of his glory days, of his master's, his mark on the world. Tipu wanted to leave his mark on the world. So did Abbas. So did Lucien, for that matter. They wanted to leave their marks on the world. And I guess the lesson with Abbas was that he had to learn that the lesson isn't in the past, but the lesson is in the future. I mean, the living is in the future. And but I lost the thread on him a bit. And anybody else had that impression as well. Did that sort of, was it the sailor and him being lifted out of the story for a while? Did it leave you not really knowing who he was in the end? Or did I miss it? Man, I could have missed it because I didn't see that next step for him, how he became, his own thinking process about how he became so, I guess, indifferent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Should I respond or?
Well, yeah, sure. Give some
Yeah.
your thoughts on it, and I'd like to hear anybody else has some of the same observations with him. What made kind of the decision of putting that sailor in the middle of it, and then we lost him for a bit? Was it intentional? Or
Yeah,
just seeing him through others' eyes was what you wanted to see?
Yeah, I think what I felt was I was starting to write that section from his perspective, going on the ship and all of these things, but it felt somewhat forced to me. It felt like these extremely traumatic things are happening to this person. And when I was trying to write it, it just never it never felt to me convincing, because to write someone in extreme situations like that, it's just to me it felt emotionally somewhat kind of a little bit flat. And I liked well, for one thing, I came across this epistolary form, which is the form of the journals, when I was researching memoirs of ship captains and things. And I just fell in love with that kind of voice. I loved the mystery of it. There's like a kind of mystery in the white space. There's a different way that we read when we're reading letters. It's almost like not, you know, a little bit voyeuristic. And there's just, to me, something kind of exciting about it. So it wasn't really a kind of a choice based on rationale so much as this is fun for me. Like this is just kind of this is kind of a risk. I realize that it is disruptive for a reader to kind of switch, not only switch point of view, but switch character, but switch like the form. But as a reader, I enjoy when a book does that to me, when it presents me with something that is like a intentional sort of disruption. But to me, the promise is that it will pay off later. I think part of the arc for Abbas is that he over time loses faith in other people. And he comes to form this idea of that if you do not think of yourself first and set everyone else aside, if you trust in your friends, if you know, these are all things that he learns on this on his during his life at sea that are come at cost, and that cost is often your dream or your own you know, your own you know, decision-making power. That it's somehow he trusted Thomas Bedecker, this sailor, and that got him nowhere. And he trusted somehow that this thing with Lucien would work out. And he just, I think by the time he gets to France, he's really convinced that he has to be on his own, and he has to look out for himself first.
Did you intend for that parallel to be between Tipu and him in terms of some of that, you know, that same sort of feeling? I don't trust anybody. The sort of the theme of trust, not trusting other people, not trusting your friends, because he in the end was betrayed as well. At least he assumed he was.
I didn't, but you know, I love that parallel you're making, because in Tipu's case, it goes in one terrible direction, and then in Abbas's case, he's able to kind of change course and change his mind.
Okay. Any other thoughts on Abbas in terms of your feelings towards him? Jane, I think I see a hand. No, I can't hear you, dear. You're on mute. Jane.
Sorry. Okay.
Hey.
Good. Okay. So I'm a bit of a romantic. I love historical, you know, novels, but I like to have a little bit of a romance. And I loved how you developed Abbas, you know, from this young kid who was taken away from his home, and he so wanted to achieve. I think he kept like searching to find his mark in life, you know, and I think he tried really hard, and I love how he matured throughout the book. And I like how you introduced Thomas, because it gave us a different perspective. But I love how it ended. And I don't mean to be, if someone didn't finish the book, but I think that at the end, he was at peace with himself. And I think that he reached his goal. You know, he opened up to love, and he had a successful business. He got to see his product, his work that he created. And I like how it ended, that he sort of, like, with all the challenges in life that he had, with having to deal with his family and having to deal surviving on his own and trying to become a man. He did become a man, and he, you know, I think he ended up being contented, or as contented as can be. So that's my thoughts on Abbas.
Good. Thanks, Jane.
So, to put grammatically, those are my thoughts on Abbas.
Thank you.
Jean.
I wanted to ask, you know, in the beginning of the book, Abbas's family and his relationship with his family and the difficulties and their expectations of him and everything else. And I think his expectations of what he would do and could do for them were really strong. And I felt like we got to a point in the story and they disappeared from the story, and we never reconnected with him connecting with his family, whether his father had passed away, whether his mother was still alive, what was going on. And it was interesting to me that when he went and met Gian, and it wasn't as he hoped it would be because Lucien was gone, that he didn't for a moment think maybe this is my cue to go find my family and take care of them again, or reestablish my life someplace else. And I got to the end and I kept thinking, but whatever happened to his family? You know, that piece of him was really something in the beginning, and I felt like it disappeared. So was that intentional, or that he had grown past them and moved on, or
they were just
mean,
lost in the war, maybe? I don't know. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I imagine that you know, it's interesting because I did think about that, like that he would be thinking of them, or but then I sort of think that might be a sort of contemporary way of thinking that he could conceivably go back. I mean, it takes him it takes at least it takes maybe I think it takes over a year. It would have taken over a year to even get to from India to Europe, and even that passage was not, you know, it was so risky, and his own passage took so many twists and turns. He ends up, I think, 5 years at sea. I think, like, when I think about in a contemporary sense, like there's still some connection with I think for him and for Jeanne, there's still some haunting kind of connection. Like she still can, like, you know, hear the sounds of her grandmother, or he still kind of can imagine his mother braiding her hair before bed. But this idea of being able to go back, it just didn't seem to me that it would even be conceivable. And to go back to what, I'm not sure, because I think at that point he would have known that the siege had happened, and they might have been fine, and they had moved to a kind of neighboring village or whatever. But to me, the way I sort of perceived it was the sense of a journey was a sort of one-way journey at that time, that it would have been a one-way journey for him.
And emotionally, you can't go home again.
Yeah, I
you can't go backwards. It's not going to be what it was when you were there before. It's so, in that sense, if he even knew where they were, you know,
yeah, I guess
going to for him.
I think to me, in my mind, he was obsessed with this idea of his purpose, and that if he was going to go home, it would be first he would have made something of himself that would, you know, merit having left in the first place, or abandoned them in the first place.
I think he does talk, Jean, in the latter part of the book. He was talking about one of his brothers when he's talking to Ram, I think. So we do get glimpses, I think, of him, you know, thinking about them in some regard. But you're right, we don't really know. And I guess it just sort of happened back then too, right?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. By the way, both Jean is also a professor. Tania, I know that you also teach at George Mason, so just letting you know, she also teaches. Miriam, yes, ma'am.
Now, while we were talking, I was, of course, I forgot what I was going to ask you.
Happens to me all the time.
Oh, I know what it was. So, Lady Selwyn, she's the lady in England who inherits the tiger, because after her husband dies, right, he gets it as the loot, as the prize for all of the looting, and then he dies and they send it home. So here's my question is, why Jahan and Abbas didn't just ask her if they could see the tiger, and for him to say, hey, I built this tiger and I want to look at it, and if you need help, I'm, be happy to try to get it to work again. Why they had to create this elaborate plan to, like, look at it in secret and or even try to steal it, which seemed kind of strange. So is that something that actually happened?
No. The Abbas is a completely fictionalized character. I don't know anything about the makers other than that was an Indian guy and a French guy. But in the novel, there's in Rouen, he meets a French clockmaker named Godin. And
Uh-huh.
basically he says, Abbas has basically found out that Lucien has died. And so, sorry if anybody hasn't read that part yet, but he dies. Anyway, so and Abbas goes to this his other rival, the sort of like clockmaker in Rouen, who's also very accomplished and wants to apprentice himself to Godin because he's just determined to kind of make himself into a clockmaker / maker of automatons. And Godin says, and he says, I made Tipu's tiger. And Godin says, I don't believe you. And I'll believe you when you can bring it here and put it in my window. And that's for him a kind of advertisement for, his own shop. And so that's the sort of like reason behind, well, it's not enough to just, look at it. And it's not really for him just about making sure the piece is, as, can be displayed and working and be observed by everyone. It for him, it would serve a kind of purpose in terms of achieving his overall kind of dream of apprenticing and then going on to become a master himself.
He wants it for himself, I think. I think he wants, it's kind of like, again, I go back to Tipu. It's kind of like Tipu's, he wants to conquer. He thinks he belongs to him, even though it doesn't. It's in my mind, at least that's where my head took it. I sort of, you had spent a lot of time on Tipu, and I wasn't quite sure, the setting of that, what that was about. And then I thought, okay, so we're mirroring these arcs of these two people. One, a negative arc, Tipu, who obviously dies, gets a gun in the head in the end, and Abbas, who's just this poor kid, but they still have the same dreams, the same ambitions. And so that was where I was sort of kind of going with it. He wants to, just like Tipu wanted to conquer, and I don't even know the name of the settlement. I can't get the name straight, but that other, he made the elephant clock to keep them happy. In the same right, I think that in my mind, Abbas wanted the tiger in order to show what he thinks is rightfully his, whether it is or isn't, because he helped make it and craft it. And he wanted that loot, if you will, that bounty. That's the way I read it. And that's the way I tried to, at least I interpreted it, it was about that loot. It was about, our desires to own what we create, to lay claim to it, to be able to point to it and say, this is what I've accomplished. And how easy that is to lose or not have, and or what does that look like? That's kind of where I was sort of taking it in my head when I was reading it, and that's why I sort of thought that was kind of very clever in terms of how that was done. So the women in the book I thought also were interesting. Both of them, the Jahan character and the lady character, both of them, both stepping outside of bounds that were in norms of their times as well. A number of you guys related well to the younger character. Any thoughts on her? Who appreciated her as someone you felt a lot of empathy towards, that could relate to quite well? Shahan? Anybody? Everybody's being quiet tonight because it's late. No? Debbie? Oh, yes. Sarah, I see you.
Yeah, I couldn't find the right button.
It's okay. I'm lucky. I'm toggling between screens too, so I'm losing people when I do that.
So I empathized a lot with John because it was interested in her, because I thought that Abbas and Lucien, both of their destinies seemed to be pretty much wrapped up in the cards already, and even the loot cards, I guess. So I was interested in what choices John was going to make, and I thought she had a lot more control over what that would be and where she would go from there. And I was very curious how that was going to end up. It was good.
Yeah, I thought, she was pretty bold, right? And she was bold as a child, and I thought it was kind of interesting that she had, really had a part early in the story, and then had sort of that thread. You kind of knew where it was going. It was kind of nice to see. I was like a little romance in something that I read. And then, of course, we had Lucian and we had, oh, yes, Christine, go ahead. You're on mute still. Sorry.
I want to echo your comment about editing. I almost gave up on this book after the first 2 chapters because I had no idea where it was going or who all these people were. There was so much packed into those first 2 chapters that after I finished the book and loved it, I had to go back and reread the beginning to kind of straighten out what I had read and why and how. I loved the way you captured, Tania captured big issues like the French Revolution, about dealing with expats in that time period, and also the little items like the Tipu's 2 sons wearing the big red ruby with the white feather on their head. I can just see these little royal children. So I loved it, and in the beginning I didn't love it.
Thank you. Thanks for sticking with it, Christine.
Yeah, editors.
But I
can
thought
be
Sharon's
our
comment
nightmares.
was dead on.
Sorry?
I thought Sharon's comment was dead on about editing, and did they make you take too much out, which inhibited me from understanding where you were going in the beginning?
No, I think actually no, they didn't. More of the editing was in the last third of the novel. And I think some of the suggestions were to pull back on I tend to be interested in different perspectives and different peripheral characters who seem to not matter at all, but I just feel, to me history, it's just so arbitrary where we choose who we choose to be the hero of the story. That like that dancer girl, there's a scene where a girl is dancing and you go into her mind briefly, and I just is following where the story was taking me. And what, some things, there's sort of a feeling sometimes when you're writing that the writing is sort of is a little bit out of your control and you're just trying to hang on. And I love moments like that. And I also just feel like I am interested in the fact that there's so many voices, particularly women's voices in history, that we will never know anything about. And I just kept thinking, is there a way to make room for them without them, kind of the novel falling apart and losing our focus on Abbas? But I really, most of the editing questions were, trying to curb that tendency in the last third of the story and to reduce the storyline between Rum and Lady Selwyn. But that I really pushed against because their story, their relationship, and those characters were for me the most fun to write. And I would never have guessed it when I started writing the book that the person that I was somehow weirdly most drawn to was Lady Selwyn, maybe also Rum. Selwyn. Yeah, because I think it would have, for me, it would have been interesting, like easy for her to be a lady, like what's that Downton Abbey character? The Maggie Smith kind of quippy British, where you can kind of laugh at her. I mean, you're laughing with her, but when I figured out that she's a novelist and that she's actually a pretty good novelist and that nobody will ever know that, and that is some kind of fundamental wound for her, then suddenly I felt so interested in her, and she became, I don't know, she's somebody I really connected to on some strange level.
I thought you developed her very well, but my real concern was with the eunuch in the beginning of the book and the clockmaker who was apparently Lucien's lover. Yeah. All of a sudden, those people kind of fell away a little too quickly without my really identifying a purpose for them.
I do think the eunuch was somebody who I kept wondering if they were going to come back, but I just thought he would never escape that prison. Once I had read about that prison, he just never, and Tipu was so ruthless about anybody who was planning any kind of conspiracy. But to me, he's so important because he continues to haunt Abbas. Like, he's the first person who sees that he is an artist, that there's something about him.
Mhm.
And to me, those people in your life, they sometimes just appear momentarily, but they have that ability to kind of like change you, to see you in a way that the most intimate people in your life will never see you, because they have this idea of who you are, but he sees something else, and that is sort of the, yeah. So he kind of haunts him, but he does sort of
But he
follow.
also haunts Tipu as well, the eunuch, and he is the string that the tie between, you know, Abbas and Tipu and his placement where he was. So I think he was a fairly important guy. And then I thought it was interesting how very similarly, you know, Abbas is the guy that inadvertently, you know, outs the whatever plot it was against Tipu that the eunuch was involved with, and likewise. Rum is got a similar situation with his family, where his family was killed as a result of another attempted coup. So these ties between those three men, I thought Tipu and Abbas and Rum were you know, was a thread that, you know, sort of joined them in some ways throughout the book, if you look at it from that perspective. Yeah. Suzanne, I'll let you go real quick because we are running out of time. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and I apologize, I don't have the book in front of me, but there is there's a quote in there that's referred to a few times, something about a sigh, and I wanted to, yeah, I wanted to try to remember the quote, but more importantly, I couldn't really connect, like what did the protagonist, or what did anybody learn as a result of that, or like what was the meaning of that? You know what I mean? So.
Yeah.
You know what quote I'm talking about, right?
Yes. Yes, that was a real verse from a poet. She was a Mughal era poet. So, but I gave it to, I made up a character and gave it to her. If anyone, does someone have the book in front of them? I'm
I
gonna.
do. I've got to find it. Let me just find it real
Okay.
quick. It's in the author's note, right?
It's in the author's note. Yeah.
That's where I'm going. Hold on. Takes me about a half second. I'm
Okay.
slow.
I appreciate it.
It's right here. Were an artist to choose for me this model, how could he draw the form of a sigh?
Yeah. So she was in the harem, the Zanana of Aurangzeb. So this woman, real woman, wrote these incredible poems, and I just thought that ability to imagine and to kind of create while in confinement is amazing to me. But in terms of the story itself, to me, I think what it signifies to Abbas is nothing more than just possibility. Like I think that sometimes a lyric or something, it just gets stuck, especially if you, I think, are an artistic temperament. Something catches your eye or catches your heart, and it just stays there. And there's not even there's just a certain level of mystery to why. There's no real reason for him to like love the actual substance of what she's saying, beyond that it just works some magic on him. And I feel that way about you know, certain, you know, bits of a poem. Like there's some mysterious hold. I feel like part of my journey as a writer began with the earliest things I can remember are reading things that made me want to do to other readers what that thing had done to me, like the effect it had on me. I wanted to create that for somebody else. And for me, I think that's what Abbas is sort of awakening to. Like art can have this effect on somebody else. It can be immortal. She is as good as dead, you know, but that verse, he cannot stop thinking.
Get it out of his mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is this sort of awakening of the character, that possibility is there. And yeah, I think probably he lives in a world where he's not exposed to much poetry. He's a lower class guy, and he's making these things, and you know, he's suddenly presented with this beautiful sort of perfect two lines. Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you, Tania, for joining us. I'd like to try to keep these meetings straight on time, and so we've gone a little over in terms of how we'd like to have you guys join us, but we really appreciate you coming in and chatting with us. One last quick question. Next book, what are you working on? What's the name? What are you doing?
I don't know. I think it's gonna be contemporary. I think it's gonna be set in DC, and I think that it will involve a family.
Okay.
We'll see though.
That'll be interesting. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Tanya, and everyone else. Stay on. We really appreciated having you join us tonight.
Thank you all so much.
All right.
Really fun.
Bye. Okay, guys. Happy Christmas coming up. Everybody got the trees up ready? You ready to go? Or whatever you're doing, whatever it is you do for the holidays. Carol had to leave. She asked me the next book. It's Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa C. Look, Miriam's very happy about that one. She's got fireworks going. How did you do the fireworks in the background? How does she do that?
Circle of Women.
Lady
I've never
Tan's
done that
Circle
before.
of Women by Lisa C. It's about a woman in the Ming Dynasty who lives to be 93 years old, who basically practiced medicine. And it's really a book about women supporting other women and following your heart. It's got great reviews. Loved it. I think you guys will really enjoy it as well. I know that this book we just had wasn't for everybody. I know that Laura, I saw your comments on Goodread, wherever Laura is. I know she was not happy with all the characters. I get it. But I was fascinated by this time period and this story. There are things in the book that drove me crazy, and I'll tell you one of them right off the top. 3 things. Okay, grifter, and avatar. Words that didn't exist back then. But she had them in the parentheses. And one of the questions I wanted to ask her, and I just decided not to, which was, when you put this thing in the parentheses, that's really the narrator talking. So if it's a narrator talking in present terms, I can understand it. In each case, it was in a parenthesis. So therefore, I didn't get quite as perturbed if I would have had it not been in a parenthesis. But that was
Didn't she also write Hamnet?
No, she was endorsed. This book was endorsed by Maggie O'Farrell, who wrote Hamnet. But yeah, you're right on that. But so anyway, I know it wasn't for everybody, but I really did like learning about this time period. And like I said, it caused me to think about things I hadn't thought about before. But I did see some of the disjointedness in the characters. I was actually surprised that she did not. Sorry, it's just me. But I really felt that arc was Abbas's arc was sort of paralleling Tipu's arc. And she was like, no, I didn't intend that. And I was like, really? Then I am really losing my mind over here. Sorry.
Oh, really? She's a young author and it just didn't hit her.
Yeah, she's a professor at George Mason University. So I was surprised. Miriam, did you catch that, by the way? Did you see that arc? Because you usually catch those things. Or Jean?
Yeah. Actually, if you want to read about like the spies and things that were going on in the Indian court, I mean, not only Sharp's Tiger and Cornwall, but the other person is Laura Willig. Wrote some of her early books like The White Carnation, and she wrote something called The Red Rose.
She's very good, by the way. She's a very good writer.
She's a wonderful writer, and she wrote these wonderful mysteries.
Okay.
That are
Didn't
historical
do
fiction.
something on PBS?
I don't know, but the books are some of the books are set in the about the spy rings, and this one of them is about India. In the 1790s, which is really interesting. I thought the book was kind of plotty. I kind of lost it in the middle. The first part was really interesting.
Yeah, when she threw in the sailor, I was kind of like, I lost a boss, and so then I'm like, who's my protagonist? I've kind of lost him, and that's why I wanted to bring that up with her. But then again, I liked the way it ended, and I was fascinated by this automaton and this whole clockmaking, and then the whole, just the entire the history of that period. And I thought it was fascinating from my perspective. But that's
and there's another book called The Far Pavilions, written a long time ago.
What's it called, dear? Eileen?
The Far Pavilions.
The Far
by
Pavilions.
MMK.
Yeah, it's an excellent book about that whole time period.
Okay, now I've got some reading for me.
So I read Lady Tan's Circle of Women for another group, and it's absolutely wonderful. I'm just going to give you just going to tell you that there are a number of pieces in the beginning about foot binding, which
I
is
know.
fascinating, but they're really gross. So I guess it's one of those trigger warnings.
Well, I couldn't
trigger
read the
warning.
fox. I couldn't read the fox hunting scene. I had to skip over
Yeah, it was pretty gross.
in this book.
No.
I was
Me
like, no.
too. Me
That
too.
killed me.
Gene,
Yeah.
I just stopped. I knew what was going to happen. I just flipped the page.
I know. I was like,
Me too.
Yeah.
yeah, that. Yeah.
Yeah, but
I
there's a lot of
agree.
stuff on the foot binding, which is fascinating, but it's also kind of,
Barbaric.
yeah, gross.
Oh, yeah,
sad.
it
Yeah.
hurts your head. I mean, and I just can't get over it. I mean, and this will, her mother died. It doesn't, I'm not gonna get to it, but this whole thing about,
1,000 years of it. Oh my God.
right?
But the
But there are-
medicine,
there are
relationships is really fantastic.
Yeah.
But there are other books about the foot binding, like from that era. So I think I'm already used to that. There's a book, there's I think with the fan, something with the fan, the secret fan. There's a book. Then there was a lot of the foot binding when they were writing the messages in the fan, and so it's awful. But I think that part I'm sort of used to already. But I'm excited to read that next book.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get Lisa C. I'm working with Carol Fitzgerald at the Book Reporter because Lisa's pretty tough to get. Avery and I were supposed to go over and see her in Frederick. She was speaking at a bookstore, but that was in the middle of my, breakage of leg, and it all sort of fell apart. So, but I'm looking forward to. So hopefully we'll get her. It's December 28th, so that's kind of in between after Christmas.
December 28th.
December
okay.
28th. Yes,
It's
and,
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. This got moved because she had issues, and then I've been doing a lot of book talks, book club people that have me in. And I had one tonight, 5:30, over at a church here, and so I had to run back and get here. So it's just been crazy. Speaking of book talks, on the 14th of December, which is what day is that? Is that Wednesday night, Thursday night? Thank you. The 14th, I am planning to do one on Veil of Doubt via Zoom. So I'm going to send out an email to all of you all probably tomorrow that says if you're interested in joining, let me know. You guys, it's the same Zoom link. I never use a different Zoom link. So just use this Zoom link if you want to join us. But I would like you to tell me if you're coming. I don't want to get it too big because I want to keep it, so we can actually have a conversation, as opposed to if you got 60 people on, no one can talk. So I'll send a Zoom link out. Just register. All I need is your email address, your name, and then we'll include you on the list. But everybody knows what the Zoom link is if you're on this book club. I never use a different one.
Same time.
What was the date?
Same time, 7 o'clock, the 14th.
14.
14th of December, which is like 2 weeks.
Well, I'm sure I speak for all of us here how proud we are of you and your
Yes.
success with this book.
Oh, I
and
hope you guys enjoyed Veil. Have you read it yet? I hope you
It's great.
enjoyed
It's just
it.
great.
it's really, and especially since you wrote it. So I'm not like, I'm not choosing you, but I am because
Yeah.
it's.
Well, I feel bad for people like Jean, who's probably read it 3 times, or where's Rita, or is Teresa on any of the beta readers? You guys, you got the ugly versions. So,
But I have to say, it was really wonderful meeting you in person.
oh yes, thank you for
That was
coming out. Oh my
awesome.
God, Jean was so great. She brought
That was
some
awesome.
friends. We had a book talk out at, it was more of a talk about the book for people who hadn't read it, out in Philadelphia a couple weeks ago. We'll be in Boston, I think on which Carol, not who's on, Laura, you're on. What is that? The 17th, I think.
I think it's the
17th of
17th.
January. And then
Yeah.
we'll be in Grand Rapids, Michigan on the 18th of January. So if you're in those areas, it's just been tough getting dates and getting venues. It's just, it's always a challenge. So. All right. Oh, thank you guys. I've kept you longer than I meant to. And I look
Thank
forward
you,
to seeing you
Sharon.
guys. If I won't see, well, I'll see many of you on the 14th. If I don't, then have a very good Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Christmas, all those holidays wrapped up. Whatever it is that you
Got to be
celebrate.
better than what Thanksgiving was.
Yeah. Hopefully, Jerry, hopefully.
Yeah, I had COVID, not once, but twice.
Oh, you poor thing. Oh no, I'm so sorry.
I've been in lockdown.
But that's the way I was last year. I was sick from like just October through January. No more.
Then I
So.
fell up the stoop.
Oh my goodness, you poor thing. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad you're feeling better. Hopefully you're on the
24
mend.
is going to be better.
It is. All right, everyone. Good night, and we'll see you either on the 14th and then again on the 28th of December.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Thank
good
you,
night.
Sharon.
Have a good one. Good
Uh-huh.
night.
Bye.